Good afternoon, everyone. Last year I started the afternoon session by, I think, offending a few people and making a couple of one-liners that went down really, really badly. So this year I've chosen not to do that. I apologise to those of you who have a bad sense of humour. So to try and keep you all awake this afternoon, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. But to start, I guess, when I'm talking to security professionals, they tell me that one of the biggest issues they have is a lack of visibility and actionable insights, I guess, to help them secure their organisation. When they say they have sleepless nights, it's due to not knowing how secure they are. And historically, I guess the only way of dealing with that is to use traditional methods, penetration testing, security assessments, and then plugging those gaps with more and more products. Most of my customers have between 20 and 60 separate security controls in their infrastructure. And to be fair, how do you maintain and configure successfully all of those controls? This traditional approach to security simply isn't working anymore. How has it worked out for all of us? I'll ask you another question, I guess. How secure do you feel right now? How secure is your organisation? You have teams of people maybe back in the office making sure everything's okay. They're bailing out comms rooms, I think someone was mentioning earlier on. They're doing other things. How secure is your organisation right now? Not when the next penetration test takes place, because the cyber criminals and the activists aren't waiting to your next penetration test to test your controls. Today's about the future of cybersecurity, so I'd like to discuss a more proactive approach to the way in which we address security control testing. So my name is Tim Ager. I head up the European business for Simulate. We are the market-leading breach and attack simulation provider globally. And today I want to talk to you about how you can become APT ready in just 4 steps. First of all, we're going to talk about the different types of exploits and attacks and how those have changed over time, just to give a bit of context. We'll then talk about traditional testing methods and how maybe they fall a bit short, and then we'll take a look at how to become more confident of your security controls and an ability to address APTs. The obligatory scary slide, I don't want to labour the point here, but we've been in an arms race for so long. And where's that got us? The value of cybercrime is increasing so greatly that the amount of money we spend protecting ourselves is never going to keep up. The value to the cyber criminals is just so great. So what do? Spend more money on more and more product X or product Y or something else with a new module? Where's that got us so far? Our view is, isn't it better to take stock of the controls we have, assess how effective they are, and then use that information to be more proactive in building a security strategy moving forward? Why is that important? Because the types of attacks that we see globally are no longer opportunistic in nature. They still exist, of course, but the days of someone trying to bring down your website or scroll something over it, trying to bring down your Exchange server to give you some outage, these moments have gone. These are instances where the MO is to target patient 0 and cause some damage with it, which is normally, I guess, limited in its toxicity. Organised crime has changed to the point now where that endpoint or that server is now the starting point for the really valuable part of the attack, and that's lateral movement in your organisation, identifying data of value, and then taking it back out again afterwards. The motives are pretty obvious, of course, financial being the most obvious one, because the value of data, particularly confidential data, is, of course, so high. So when we talk about APTs, why do these concern anyone here? For the simple reason that they don't just target large organisations. The large organisations are the ones that make the press. So if you take a look maybe at the silence group here, this is a good example where banking organisations were targeted and money was physically extracted out of ATM machines because of someone's ability to get into the internal banking network and run commands within an ATM command system. Government organisations are also at risk. The Turner APT group out of Russia, back in August, not too long ago now, targeting public sector research organisations, looking for intellectual property. In both of these cases, organisations that use our testing platform were typically unable to defend themselves against those particular exploits. But by using a testing platform, they were able to identify that in almost real time and then remediate to make sure they were not exposed from it moving forwards, rather than just not knowing or waiting until their AV or EDR platform vendor provided a patch, which may be weeks afterwards. Just to go into the silence APT in more detail, this is the type of attack we're talking about. These organised crime organisations are patient. They have time on their side. So it's not just about working out, oh, you're exposed to spear phishing emails, let's send you one. They're going to start sending reconnaissance emails. What works? What doesn't work? If something doesn't work, that's not a bad response for them. They know that something will fail, so they can try something else. Over time, they identified that a spear phishing email would be the best route into this organization. This is the Dutch Bangla Bank, basically, as an example. That spear phishing email led to a command and control solution being deployed, enabling a module within that banking network. From that point, the attackers were able to manually send commands and more payloads to that device to run a second command and control module to set up a proxy to communicate between the two. At that point, they downloaded modules for lateral movement. That's a real concern because lateral movement attacks typically take between 4 and 6 months to identify when they take place. That's a lot of dwell time in your network when bad things can happen. From that point, they managed to find an ATM command console and enter commands like withdraw money. And people were actually sent to ATMs to then withdraw that cash. This is seriously big business, and these things are happening every single time, this one in August. Why is that a problem? Because APT's friend is stealth. These things are designed to evade your normal security controls. They're clever, they're intelligent. Spear phishing, most of the conversations I've had today echo the 60% of conversations I have with organizations I speak to on a weekly basis, which is, my CFO got an email and he sent it for payment. It's a classic example. These attacks are still happening and they're still very, very effective. In the exploitation phase, we're seeing attacks now becoming fileless in nature, running from RAM. How do you defend against that? You've got your AV, you've now got an EDR. Great, but one of them tests to see whether things can install, one tests to see whether things can run. Can you manage two solutions? Is that capable? Are you capable of doing that? Patching, maintaining, configuring? Very difficult. And post-exploitation is the real concern. Everyone's worried about lateral movement, but no one quite understands what the impact of it is in their organization. You can look at privileged access controls, really, really important piece of the armory. But without identifying the concerns or the scale of your risk to lateral movement, what do you choose? What's right for your needs? Privileged escalation is the key here, because without privileged escalation, most attacks will just crash on the endpoints themselves. And data exfiltration is the absolute key to all of this. There's no point getting in unless you can get back out again with that data of value. So I'd ask the question again, how secure is your company right now? Do you feel happy? Do you sleep well at night? Do you know you're exposed to certain types of exploits? What are you doing about it? How vulnerable are you? How effective are your security controls? Are they all good? Are some of them good? I'm not talking about whether you have brand A because it's better than brand B, because fundamentally, most email gateways, most EDR solutions are going to function relatively effectively if you configure them correctly in the first place. Are we protected against the newest threats? We're identifying between 2 and 3 new real-world exploits on a day-to-day basis that are targeting organizations just like yours. Are your endpoint controls protecting you against them? Is your email gateway up to date? How do you prioritize your company's resources? We've all got alert fatigue. You run vulnerability scans, and by the time you've got a chance to remediate, you've run another vulnerability scan. They're giving you information which is not contextual. It doesn't necessarily give you remediation advice. So let's talk about traditional testing methods and how they've been working for us. So vulnerability scanning is the first of these. It's a great tool. Most of our customers, about 70%, use vulnerability scanning. It's a really important function. But ultimately, it's not giving you necessarily contextual information. It's telling you what might be exposed, what vulnerabilities might exist on your endpoints. But if those endpoints are in a part of your network that doesn't have internet connectivity, why do you care about updating and patching those vulnerabilities? It's completely irrelevant to you. The context is typically missing from vulnerability scanning. Manual penetration testing, really, really important piece of your armory in making sure you stay secure. But if you're running them once a year, it's a snapshot. It's a holiday photo from last year. It's a memory of what your security posture was like when it was done. They are limited by scope. You don't necessarily have to penetration test your entire network. You penetration test that new segment of your network or that new range of applications or services. So it's not necessarily telling you how secure your entire organization is. It's limited by the skills of the people that you're using to run the penetration test. 2 weeks ago, I was with a large healthcare provider in London running a free-of-charge evaluation. And they were very confident in their ability to repel email-borne attacks and very confident in their EDR's ability to repel malware from running and actually doing nasty things. We were able to download and run 3 elements of malware, And the colour that the contact we were working with was an interesting kind of like, it was like a cuttlefish, basically. She just went very strange colours. And the reason for that was because a week later, they'd had someone in to complete their Cyber Essentials Plus accreditation. They'd had a penetration test, and they were told categorically that these 3 pieces of malware, or malware like that, shouldn't run on their network. And we got them through with a system testing their system's capabilities. So how effective was that penetration test in that case? Answer, not very. They're still important. You may, for regulatory purposes, require someone to sign a piece of paper, a human pair of eyes to sign off on your homework. I'm not saying we'd replace that, but if you're not doing that on a continuous basis, what's it really worth to you in day-to-day terms? So red teaming helps solve that, of course, but red teaming is crazy expensive, and again, it's limited by scope, limited by the skills of the people you use, and again, it requires an awful lot of time invested. And can you really justify running it every single week of the year? Probably not. Why is that important? Penetration testing as a concept has been around, I think, since the late 60s, early 70s. It's a military concept. It's been used in the security or the IT space for about 25 years. It's still fit for purpose, but the purpose is questionable. What is a pen test to you? Is it testing your security controls and infrastructure? Is it secure code reviews? Is it application penetration testing? Is it physical penetration testing? It's such a broad church. How do you actually know what you're getting with your penetration test? Does it serve your purposes? Why is that so important? Because if you speak to the analyst, if you speak to Gartner, they always say very clearly, it doesn't matter how much money you spend. It doesn't matter whether you've got product A or product B. Can you validate the operational effectiveness of your security controls? It's not whether you've made the right purchasing choices. It's are you maintaining your security controls effectively to make sure they repel the latest attacks? So how can you measure security effectiveness of your controls? Well, there's 7 key areas, and they map into the kill chain. So in the pre-exploitation phase or attack delivery, exploits are targeting, or groups are targeting your organization via email. About 75% of attacks coming in via email. Your web gateway, can workstations get to known bad websites and bring back malicious content and payloads? And your web applications. You've got web apps, you're publishing more and more web apps. Are they secure? You've then got the exploitation phase. So that's typically phishing. We're all familiar with phishing. They're becoming more sophisticated. We always say that, well, they're becoming more sophisticated. But really, the concepts are pretty similar. And yet people still click on them, and people still interact with those types of attacks. And then there's the endpoint. This is the real battleground, increasingly. It's the beachhead into your organization. If I can't get onto your workstation, I can't do very much to try and breach your organization. And that's about assessing your EDR capabilities. Are they running effectively? One of the interesting things we've found with our customers is that most of the latest and greatest AI-driven technologies out there are very good at doing the clever stuff. But because they're investing so much time in doing the clever stuff, they're ignoring the basic stuff, which is why you still have WannaCry variants in the marketplace, because people are still clicking on them, interacting with them, and they're still running. So that's a real concern. Don't forget the baselines, that the basics are still being used. And then there's the really nasty stuff. Post-exploitation phase is lateral movement and data exfiltration. When I'm in your network, I need to move to find something of value, be it a database, a server, something of value. And then I need to find a way to bypass your DLP controls if you have any. And of course, that's a real concern, because if you don't, then if stuff's coming in, it's probably going to get back out with data of value from your organization. So we would argue it would make real sense to be able to test each one of those security controls on an individual basis. How effective is my email gateway from repelling malware, trojans, worms, payloads? How effective is my EDR platform from stopping malicious behavior from running on this endpoint device? The best way to do that is in 4 steps. If you have a tool that gives you ability to test your systems. This is a system testing your systems. It's not subjective. It's not a person analyzing your technologies and your controls. It's a system that's doing all of this. The first thing to do is simulate attacks. Breach and attack simulation, as the name would suggest, is about targeting your organization with a range of simulated exploits, attacks, and techniques. Once you've done that, you can identify how exposed you are. That's typically in the form of a risk score, which is normally benchmarked against something like the NIST framework, but could also be passed out to a GRC platform for demonstrating risk in financial or business terms. When you've done that, it's about evaluating the response. Where are we vulnerable? Where are we successful? What do we need to do about that? And then it's about remediation. Don't just get a report that says your email gateway is terrible. Get a report that says your email gateway is not particularly effective at doing the following things. Here's what you need to do about that. And once you've done that, step and repeat. Repeat the process, run the test again after you've remediated, and see that risk score come down. If you are working towards compliance guidelines, Cyber Essentials Plus, PCI, CBEST, whatever it may be, if you can demonstrate a reduction in your risk profile, that's half the battle. Being able to quantify it is very, very difficult, and that's where a breach and attack simulation platform can give you that type of visibility. It's also very powerful for reporting and presenting to the board. Rather than reacting and saying, we got breached, I need money to fill this gap, which is very, very reactive and ends up with a lot of money being spent on point solutions, why not go to the board and say, here's the kill chain, here's our exposure across each one of those touch points. My strong recommendation is we target investment for the next 6 months on lateral movement controls, for sake of argument. That's much more proactive. It's not asking forgiveness after a bad event has happened. It's going there seeking permission to start with and say, from a position of understanding, here's our controls, here's our posture, here's what I recommend we do about that. The key thing about this, of course, is being able to identify the information you're exposed to, get it in a quantifiable output, which is a risk score, and being able to remediate on the right-hand side, seeing what you're exposed to and being able to fix it. So, some takeaways from that session, although there are many, and in conversations this morning, many of you have been coming up with different ways in which you could use this type of technology. APTs require continuous testing. It's no point just setting up an email gateway and saying, we've got the latest and greatest, we're going to be secure, because you fundamentally will not be secure unless you configure it and maintain it. Current testing methods give you a snapshot in time. They are not comprehensive. They're as comprehensive as you make them, depending on the timescale, the frequency, and the scope of the work that you provide. And we would say that in order to really, really look at the future of cybersecurity, you need to run security posture assessments on an ongoing and continuous basis to make sure you're making the right decisions as to which AI-driven wonder silver bullet solution you go and buy next to actually meet your business requirements. That's it in a nutshell. We are exhibiting up in the next floor above. So if you do want to come and discuss this platform and how it can be used, then you're very welcome to come and discuss further. But I'll take any questions at that stage. Or you've all fallen asleep, which was the risk, right? Because I didn't use any of my hilarious jokes. But
there is a Q&A session at the end.
Oh, fantastic. Great. No problem. In which case, thank you very much for your time.